Hello everybody, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Kyle Broda with FullSkillsExamPrep.com, and of course we are here to help you pass your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. So a big thank you for tuning in, and I really hope you enjoy this lesson. It is a fantastic new topic, and it's quite rare actually to have a new program in the economic class. So I hope you're excited about the Atlantic Immigration Pilot programs. Now for some of you, you might be a bit discouraged because if you graduated recently, well, this program didn't exist. So maybe you didn't cover it when you took your diploma. Well, don't you worry. We've got you 1,000,000% covered. So obviously you're taking the initiative by going through this lesson, which is a big step, of course, towards mastering this topic so that you can handle it on your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. Of course, the information that we are discussing is in your test day data booklet. And of course, the simulation exams have you covered with questions on this topic as well. And of course, we talk about how to handle these types of questions in the seminar. All right, so I hope you enjoy the lesson. We really enjoyed putting this lesson together for you. And by the end of this, this new program will be crystal clear for you. So before jumping into the little details of this program, let's take a step back and take a look at this program in relation to the Atlantic Provincial Nominee programs. So we're going to see that there is a difference between the two. However, they are certainly related. So when we take a look at the Atlantic Province PNPs, now we have New Brunswick, for example, and if you're working through your test day data booklet, you know you have access to all of these programs, of course. So in the New Brunswick Provincial Nominee Program, well, you have their own Provincial Express Entry. Now you have business, of course, as a program in the New Brunswick PNP, skilled worker with employer support, and skilled worker with family support. Now, when we take a look at PEI, well, PEI has quite a few programs. PEI has 7 right now. So they have their own express entry program as well, just like New Brunswick. They have their own skilled worker, they have international graduate, they have a few entrepreneur programs as well. When we dig a little bit deeper and take a look at Nova Scotia, well, Nova Scotia has quite a few programs as well. Now you have, of course, the express entry programs in there, and there's 2 varieties of that. You have skilled worker, semi-skilled worker, low-skilled worker, entrepreneurs, international graduate entrepreneurs as well. And finally, Newfoundland and Labrador. Well, that's an easier one, really, because they only have 3 programs. So they have an express entry related program as well. For the skilled worker, they have their own skilled worker and their own international graduate program. Well, when we look at these provincial programs, these are, of course, related to the provinces themselves. Now, the beauty of the AIPP, which means the Atlantic Immigration Pilot programs, is that these programs essentially work together. So we have all the Atlantic provinces working together in these programs. So these programs, of course, work with businesses and with, of course, the candidates themselves to cover the AIPP International Graduate Program, the AIPP High Skilled Program, and the AIPP Intermediate Skilled Program. So these PMPs all work together in this one, and you might think of this as sort of a regional program. So it's for the Atlantic provinces. Now, what they are doing with this is, of course, retaining people who want to live in the Atlantic, but they're making it easier for somebody who, for example, graduated in Newfoundland to stay in the Atlantic by maybe immigrating through New Brunswick or staying in New Brunswick. Same thing with people with job offers. So we're going to see later on, once we start really digging into the details, that it gives a lot of flexibility to qualified people who are maybe in PEI, but want to maybe move to Newfoundland. So it gives that flexibility of working together with the PNP authorities in the Atlantic provinces as a whole, versus the PNP authorities working individually to recruit people to go to their own specific province. So essentially in the AIPP, we have three big players. So we have the applicants themselves, we have the designated Atlantic businesses, and of course the Atlantic PNP authorities. We're going to take a look at the role of each of these players in the AIPP and of course their relationship with each other. Now something important to remember with the AIPP is that it is not express entry related. So as we just saw in the previous slide, a lot of the provincial nominee programs have an element of express entry in them. Well, we're going to see that the AIPP is not express entry related at all. So in the AIPP, you have three individual programs for people to immigrate through. So you can probably guess what they are just by looking at these people. Well, one is the International Graduate Program, and one is the High Skilled Program, and one is the Intermediate Skilled Program. Well, each of these programs, of course, correlates to each other in terms of preparing for your exam, and of course, each program relates to all of these elements. So the language of a person, the language level of the person plays a role, of course, in which program they might qualify for. Same with work experience, education, as we've seen in pretty much all of the economic programs. And of course, the job offer plays a very big role in this. So remember that work experience, of course, plays a pretty big role in just about every economic immigration program. Well, the AIPP is a little bit special in this because when you look at the International Graduate Program, you can see that you might be surprised actually because really there is no work experience requirement. However, of course, when you look at the other two programs, there is a work experience requirement. And the high skilled program, the person has to have NOC OAB work experience in terms of the role. And of course, in the intermediate, it is at a NOC C. Now, in terms of the time a person spends at the job, well, it's a minimum of 1 year. Now, the beauty of this is that it's pretty flexible in terms of being non-continuous. So when we look at the Federal Skilled Worker Program, for example, remember that that requires at a minimum 1 year of continuous employment full-time, of course at the appropriate level. Well, with this one, it is similar to the Canadian Experience class in that the work experience can be non-continuous. However, of course, it has to be within the last 3 years. Now, another really interesting detail about the AIPP with regard to the high skilled program and intermediate skilled program is that work experience that the person obtained while they were studying counts towards immigration purposes. So this is pretty rare because in most of the other economic programs, that work experience would not count. But in this one, it does count. So it is really exciting, and I think it provides a lot of flexibility for people, of course, to immigrate through this program. So maybe later on, once you pass the exam and become an RCIC, well, this might be an area that you will specialize in. And of course, language plays a big role in the AIPP. So we've seen this in quite a few of the other lessons in terms of the economic program. I think every single economic program has a language requirement. Well, the AIPP is no different. Now, the difference, actually, there's something pretty special with the AIPP, and that is the fact that the language requirements are pretty low. So they're lower than a lot of the other economic programs that we look at. And this is particularly interesting because when you work in immigration, well, you might have people who have all these skills and intent and things like that, but if they don't meet those language requirements, it's usually pretty difficult for them to find a way to immigrate. So the good news is here in that the AIPP has a minimum requirement of only a CLB4. Now the CLB4 goes with the 4 language exams that are used for immigration. So we have, of course, the TEF. Now the score for the TEF is over here, and the person would have to, of course, meet within that range at a minimum. If they exceed it, no problem. If they get below this, it's a big problem because they wouldn't qualify for the program then. Okay, so CELPIP. CELPIP's really easy with CLB, with correlating CELPIP to the CLB, simply because, well, a CELPIP 4 is a CLB 4. Now IELTS is just very slightly more complicated for that, but really a 4 in speaking and writing, and a 3.5 in reading, and a 4.5 in listening is a CLB 4. Now TCF is the new one, and if you have been working through our videos, working through our lessons, keeping up to date with the government website, well, you probably know that this was recently added as an official exam that's used for immigration. It used to be just TEF, IELTS, and CELPIP. Well, now TCF has joined the group. In terms of your exam, the concept's the same, really. It's just an added exam, really. So the score that people need in this one is over here. This is, of course, all in your test day data booklet, so don't worry about this too much. But again, it's really important to know this because it helps us to know if, in the scenario that you might face in the exam, if a person is an ideal candidate for the AIPP. Now, of course, education plays a role in this program, in the AIPP. And essentially, the high-skilled program and intermediate skilled program have basically the same requirements. So it is a Canadian educational credential, and that means high school or higher. Now, a lot of people, of course, won't have a Canadian educational credential, so a foreign educational credential is, of course, valid as well. But remember that they need something. And if you're thinking of an ECA, you are correct. For the International Graduate Program, it's a little bit more complex, so we're going to put this on another slide. But essentially, the education requirements for the high-skilled program and intermediate skilled program are the same as each other. Okay, so here is the International Graduate Program education requirements. So essentially, you have a Canadian diploma requirement, and this has to be a 2-year post-secondary credential. We saw with the other two programs in the AIPP that the minimum requirements are a high school diploma. Well, for this one, it's a little bit different. Of course, the minimum here is a 2-year post-secondary credential. And now this is not Canadian, well, it's Canadian, but a different type of Canadian, I suppose. It has to be graduated from a publicly funded Atlantic educational institution. So remember that the Atlantic provinces, of course, you have the flags right in front of you there. But of course, the Atlantic provinces are Newfoundland, PEI, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia. Okay, and here is something interesting as well, and that is, of course, the person has to have been a full-time student there for a minimum of 2 years. Now, there is a kind of Atlantic residency requirement on this as well. So the person has to have lived in an Atlantic province for 16 of the 24 months before graduation. All right, well, in terms of the job offer that the people who want to immigrate through the AIPP need to have, this is where we start to correlate with the relationship of the candidate himself or herself and the Atlantic business. So the Atlantic business has to have certain things in the job offer. It's just like a lot of the other programs that we took a look at. Essentially, the work itself needs to be at a certain level for someone to be able to use this to immigrate through one of these programs in the AIPP. So with the International Graduate Program, it's a NOC OABC job, and we could see that it's the exact same with the Intermediate Skilled Program. Now with the High Skilled Program, it's a NOC OAB job. Now the job itself has to be full-time, and of course the contract has to be for 1 year. with the first two. Now, with the intermediate skilled program, the contract is indeterminate. And there's a very important note on the bottom here. Now, this goes across the entire spectrum of the economic class, where the person who is applying with the job offer has to prove that they can actually do the job. So they have to be able to prove, of course, the education, training, qualifications, everything like that that's listed on the NOC. Okay, so that touched upon a little bit anyways of the relationship between the applicant himself or herself and the business. Well, the business and the PNP authorities have a relationship as well. And we're going to explore this, of course, in depth in the slide right after this one. But just to begin looking at this, we need to think of two very important words. Now, those two words are designated and endorsed. So the employer himself or herself or the company or whatever the situation is has to be designated by their PNP official so that they can have a job offer that is endorsed by the province. Now, we'll take a look at what the process is to get endorsed in the next slide. But essentially, even though an LMIA is not needed, of course, the Atlantic business has to prove that they couldn't hire locally. Now, when I say locally, I mean a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident. So you can see that that's very similar to one of the LMIA requirements. Okay, something really unique and really interesting is that the employer has to have a relationship with an immigrant service provider organization. Now, one thing that's incredibly interesting about the AIPP is that they essentially, it's employer driven, so they want to help employers, of course, but they want to make sure that the immigrant himself or herself and their families have what's often called a soft landing. So when they come to Canada, we're going to see that there has to be a settlement plan and everything like that to make sure that, of course, settlement support is provided. Now, the employer as well, the process doesn't really stop once the immigrant turns into a permanent resident and starts working. Well, the employer has to provide ongoing reports of the staff that they hired through the AIPP, and of course what they're paying them, what the support is that they're providing them, the person's job title, etc. Now, for employers who really need an employee quickly, so one really interesting thing about the IIPP is that they're expecting to complete most PR applications within 6 months. However, if an employer needs the employee before then, well, there is a temporary work option for those staff while they're waiting for their permanent residency application to be processed. Now we are starting to get an idea of the role of each of these three players in the AIPP. Well, let's go through the procedures that the businesses would go through, that the applicant himself and the provincial authorities would go through in this great new immigration option. So the first thing to note is that we've been looking, of course, at the applicant, the businesses, and the PNP authorities. Well, in the procedures themselves, there are two other players. Now, one of them is, of course, the settlement service provider, and the other is CIO Sydney. So let's take a look at what happens in a procedure for the AIPP. And of course, we'll look at this really step by step. All right, so the first step has to do with the relationship between the Atlantic business and the settlement services provider. So essentially, the business would reach out to the settlement service provider and organize some type of relationship. So they would say that they're expecting some people to immigrate and work with them. So what can they do? So they would start that relationship. Now, the next step relies on the Atlantic business as well, and it has to do with the Atlantic business with the Atlantic Provincial Nominee Program authorities. So essentially, once that relationship with the SSP is organized, well, the Atlantic business would organize their application to the Atlantic PNP authorities. Now, in here, they have to send proof of their good standing. What this means is they have to essentially prove that they're not in default or that they haven't done anything to contravene IRPA or anything like that. So obviously they are a business in good standing. Now they would have to send proof of that relationship with the SSP. And of course, this is something really important because remember that the Atlantic businesses in the AIPP, one of the really interesting things with this is that they do not have to have an LMIA. However, remember that they have to prove that they cannot hire a Canadian citizen or permanent resident locally, and that is the reason why they have to look for a foreign national. So remember, in immigration, of course, you have to prove everything. So once that is submitted, well, ideally, what would happen if everything's done properly, and of course, for you as future RCICs, this is part of your job, is to make sure everything like this is done properly. Well, they would receive designation from the province. Now, once they have that designation, they are designated Atlantic businesses. And then they can, of course, move on to the next steps. So the next step with the business as well is once they find their perfect candidate. And remember what we talked about before, this has to be provable as well. Well, they can make a job offer to that person. And if the applicant is happy with the job offer, well, the applicant would say yes, or obviously, and then the next step in there has to do again with the designated Atlantic business. So they would again approach the settlement services provider. And this time they would work on a needs assessment. So they would discuss the applicant, if the applicant would be coming with family or anything like that. And what they would do is work together to make sure that the applicant's settlement happens smoothly. So they would receive an individualized settlement plan. Now, the next step in here as well has to do with, again, the designated Atlantic business and the PNP authorities. So now the designated Atlantic business sends that personalized settlement plan, the endorsement application, and the job offer to the Atlantic Provincial Nominee Program authorities. And that is when the PNP authorities get in touch with the applicant himself, and they would issue him an endorsement letter. So after this entire process here, well, the applicant applies for permanent residency. Now, remember, with this program, it's not express entry. It's not express entry related whatsoever at all. The application itself is a paper-based application, and the applicant himself or herself, or of course, if the person's working with an RCIC, they would have to choose which program in the AIPP that the person would apply through. So this isn't done automatically. They're not giving an invitation to apply or anything like that. Remember that this is not express entry related, and I think that will make it a little bit easier to study. Well, anyways, the PR application goes to CIO Sydney, and as you may have seen, one of the really great aspects of this program is that they're expecting all the PR applications to, or 80% of the PR applications under the AIPP to be completed within 6 months. Now, if you would like to read further about the AIPP, well, here's 3 of the best links for you. if you are watching this on the free lessons section of our website, well, all these links are just below the video. If you're watching on YouTube, I would recommend you go to the fullskillsexamprep.com website and take a look at the free lessons section, because it's better to watch it on the free lessons page, because of course we have all the links there ready for you to click through. So I hope the AIPP is a little bit more clear for you now. It is a pretty interesting program because, of course, like I said before, it is I think the first program really that combines different provincial authorities under one umbrella. So this is an interesting program. I hope that you, of course, feel more confident about the AIPP as it might come up on your exam. And well, you went through the lesson. You're going to go through the questions as well right after this. And that's going to really help you to, of course, refine that knowledge that you've obtained over here. And of course, to see it in the context of questions. And of course, to see how to answer those questions to make sure that you pass your ICCRC Full Skills Exam. So on the behalf of the entire team over here at fullskillsexamprep.com, a very big thank you for tuning in. Be sure to visit our sponsors because they all provide amazing support for you as RCICs. And of course, everybody is cheering for you. So get ready for your exam. We can't wait to welcome you as RCICs, and keep up the good work.